Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, coming to you live here on the West Coast, 9 p.m. every single week. We're going to be breaking down the main slate for college football on both DraftKings and a little FanDuel, because I know FanDuel is getting a little bit of pop lately. We're, of course, brought to you by the world-famous FTN Network, and we have been grinding CFB all week. It's a beautiful thing. Started on Tuesday, got a little fun belt. We'll have some action coming in here soon. We've got some, bigger programs. Tomorrow's 3-gamer pretty nice. Lots of good stuff happening if you're a college football fan, and there's pretty much very, very few days where there won't be at least a college football or an NFL game, which is a beautiful thing. All right, we are going to do what we always do. I'm going to bring my man, the real smart guy. He's been hitting his plays very, very well. Jake Kuchek, my co-host, partner in crime. We're going to break down the 12-game main slate here on DraftKings from a game-by-game perspective. We'll also give a core for each site. I'll also talk a little bit of FanDuel, PrizePicks, and any betting opportunities that we might have at the end. Feel free to interact throughout the show if you're watching live. Hit that like button, ask those questions, hang out with us. I do appreciate it. I know Jake does. Let's pop them through there. Jake, with the new – ooh, look at that camera. New camera and all. Looks like maybe even a new cut. I don't know. I need one, but looking good, man. How you doing?
Doing good, man. So my usual laptop is on the fritz. I'm on my daughter's tablet, and I have not figured out where the camera is yet. So I'm looking off to the side a little bit. I promise everything is normal. I'm getting used to the technology right now. So
for sure. No, the camera on that thing is pretty damn clear, honestly. All right. We're going to jump right in here. But first, I want to talk a little bit. Last week, it went pretty well. It was a very chalky week. But for the most part, we dodged some key injuries and some busts. But for the most part, it seemed like it was an okay week. How was your weekend? And then how has this week been for you as well?
Yeah, went pretty well, man. So, I had the Dylan Gabriel call of the crazy 350 and 6 touchdowns. He didn't quite get there, but he ran it a ton, right? And so it wasn't quite how I imagined him doing it, but Dylan Gabriel certainly didn't let me down, right? It was still a very good week, not just for Dylan Gabriel in DFS, but also for potential Dylan Gabriel Heisman futures. I think he kind of put himself back in the race, beating Texas in that game. So that was good, and had a good amount of Devin Neal, and that went pretty well for us. Would have liked to see that game stay a little bit closer so they could keep pounding the rock with him, but super efficient, man. That was great, and overall pretty solid day, and then ended up binking an NFL, which that never happens for me. Binking an NFL turbo slate on Sunday. I was last minute before my daughter's birthday party, threw one in, and benefited from a Justin Jefferson injury and a crazy Jordan Addison game, and it went well. So overall, very good DFS weekend. College football went well, and then I always consider it getting lucky in NFL. I'm no good at it, but luck was on my side this past weekend.
For sure. All right, so we're gonna jump right in here. Last week's slate had 4 or 5 games, 60 totals. There was a crazy amount of fantasy goodness, lots of different options to go through. This week, it's not a polar opposite per se. There are some high scoring games, but there's also a ton in the mid 40s, mid 50s, a little bit more of defensive battles on this particular slate, which really makes, 2 games on this one stick out like a sore thumb that I think a lot of ownership will go to. But we're going to start this one off with, we have both Iowa schools on the slate too. Yay. But we're going to start things off with Iowa State versus Cincinnati. 45 total. Cincy -5. I don't know. Iowa State's been putting up some points lately. But this game, I don't know how I feel about this one. Break it down for us, my good sir.
Yeah, man. So I was looking through, kind of the games that we were going to talk about, and I was waiting. Usually I'm like, okay, I hope I get a total in the 70s, and we can really jump into that one. And then I kind of was like, okay, I hope I get a total in the 60s. And then I was like, okay, I hope I get a total in the 50s. And there weren't too many of those either. So Yeah, definitely hit the nail on the head with what you said, with it being a lot of defensive battles. But yeah, in this one, I mean, Iowa State, like, we think of them kind of historically as a pretty tight defense, but they've given up some yardage and they've given up some points. Obviously, Oklahoma blew them out, and even though the scoring wasn't necessarily there for TCU, that was mainly because of a Chandler Morris injury and like them kind of being discombobulated. Monty Bailey still went for 150 yards. And if they had any semblance of the passing game going, I feel like they would have had things going on all cylinders. So I don't think Iowa State is definitely is a defense that we need to shy away from. There is a little bit of a weather concern in this one, which would make me kind of gravitate towards either running games or, kind of short to intermediate route type receivers, as opposed to deep threat type receivers. And also, when you have a guy like Emory Jones, there's a lot of ups and downs. There could be some ball security issues in a weather game. And so if you had any inkling of using Emory Jones at 7-3, I'm probably off that train. Not super interested. I also think that the backfield with Kiner and Miles Montgomery, obviously Kiner has a little bit shown to be the guy, but not to the degree that we're going to consistently get like 20 carries out of him. We might, but he's only done that once, and he's gotten the 20 touch games a couple times, but they might have Ryan Montgomery coming back into the fold too, and so I feel like those running back touches are going to get just a little bit spread out, to the point that I don't fully trust Kiner, whereas I think maybe some other folks might be interested in him on the slate. It is a decent price, but I can't get all the way there. More so because I just don't want to waste a running back spot on a guy that is potentially splitting carries three ways. A little bit of interest in Xavier Henderson. He's definitely a prime target for Emory Jones, and the volume will be there. 6.5 is a fair price. It's okay. If I'm choosing anyone that I'm kind of hyped about on this game, and I think we're going to be kind of very interested in and starved for value on this slate, trying to fit in those Kansas and Washington, Oklahoma State, and Oregon players. But Shimon Metayer, who had the game of his life against BYU right before their bye week, he really showed something. Not a ton of volume, but they were looking to him in the red zone. They got him on isolation plays, and he got in the end zone twice against BYU. So had a chance to kind of go through things in practice. I wouldn't be surprised if he was featured a little bit more, especially if there is a kind of a weather concern and they want to elect to go for some of those underneath the safer passes. Little bit narrow, only 8 catches on the season, but definitely should have some matchup advantages, and at only 4K could be a good value option. And then on the Iowa State side, I mean, it's really tough for me to get to Rocco Becht. Yes, he's 5'3", and that's pretty much free as far as quarterbacks go, but really has only had one useful DFS game all season. And since he's not really a defense I'm looking to attack, even though this isn't the historically tight Sauce Gardner type of defense, this is still good enough that I think there are better options in the quarterback arena, and because of that, I'm probably also not looking to get to Jalen Noel. He's had some decent games and puts up some decent volume, but not really looking to go there, especially with the weather concerns. Running back wise, Eli Sanders put up a decent amount of volume. I think it's kind of a different version of the same problem with him and Katavius Norton and your guy from early on in the season, Abu Sama. They're all kind of getting in on the touches, and it just adds up to a place that I don't really want to go. So, you know, if I'm taking anybody from this game, it's going to be a value play, and Mateo is probably the direction I'm going with that. I don't know. Maybe you can make a case for Emory Jones in this one. I'm not getting there.
Man, you know, the few slates that Cincy's been on, I don't know what it is, but Emory Jones has been kind of chalky, and the first wave of kind of, you know, and ownership projections in college are really tough, but I'm seeing quite a bit of Emory Jones, you know, leaning towards like 15 to 18%, which isn't a ton, but it's like 10 more percent than I would have thought and would have myself. So I hope I don't get beat by Emory Jones semi-chalk, because I'm really not there with him. I get the allure because he has that rushing upside, and like you said, if there's going to be some weather issues, then he's probably going to be doing a fair amount of, you know, 15 to 20 carries himself. He has been throwing the ball a lot better this year, honestly. Has 29 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last like 5, something like that. So I can see the allure there. But I don't particularly love it. It's not like he's 5'4", 6K, something like that. 7'3" is enough to where I can get away from it without feeling too bad. And the running back situation for Cincinnati, Kiner, like you mentioned, I'm not that excited about him. He is fine. I do think he'll see ownership. But if I'm using anyone in this game, and I don't like to use a younger running back on the road, but you took my thunder there with Sama. He's 3'8". He's getting some catches. He had only the 6 carries last game, but he's been getting right around 6 to 8. And like 10 touches with the factoring in the target. So he's getting the work there, and I think they are going to start getting him a little bit more as they go on. But like you said, there's just so many guys getting touches. Norton, Sanders, you know, what can we really do with Rocco Becht? Is he going to, you know, keep the defense honest enough with his passing ability, which really is quite minuscule? I know he threw for almost 350 yards against Okie State, but really not that great of an offense. There is some value there with Jalen Noel, but I'm really kind of off this game as well, unless I want to take Sama. And I'm really trying to limit my risk with some of these cheap running backs, because I've been bit quite a bit this season. And last week, it was one of the best week I've had since week 0, honestly. I'm not ashamed to say that. And I just really kind of just played safe guys, which is no fun for me, but I'm really trying to limit my risk where possible. So I'm light on this game for sure. All right, moving on, we got Syracuse versus Florida State, a total of 55, which is might as well be 70 on a slate like this. Florida State 17.5-point favorites. The huge dud last week by Syracuse was a total disappointment. I got away. Quinn Allen still had a decent game, by the way. I didn't end up using him, which one of our subs won like $3,000 last week, winning a big tournament with Allen and running back, so I'm happy for them. He did score a touchdown, their only touchdown against North Carolina, so he's still going. But, man, Garrett Schrader, that's 2 straight duds out of him. I'm obviously not going to go there this week. I know a lot of people will jump off as well, but for one GPP throwaway lineup, I have to put him somewhere, because there's just like such a troll spot for him to bounce back and put up like a 30-35. His price isn't that great. He still has a ton of talent, a lot of upside if he can put it together. But this Syracuse offense, man, I don't know if, I'm not saying they got solved suddenly, but they don't look like the same unit that they did just 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that's kind of scary for me. If you're going to use somebody from the Cuse, it's definitely Allen. He's still the bell cow, playing over 70% of the snaps, right around 50% of the carries, which the rest are basically going to Schrader. There is a cheapie here in Donovan Brown, who's getting majority of the work, and still, like, if you're going to use Schrader, you think he's going to, you know, break out of it and start playing well again, Brown would be the guy that you could pair up with him there. Most relevant as a WR1, WR2 tweener type of play. Now with Allen, he has a ton of touchdown equity, which is why I think his ownership could still creep a little bit higher than maybe we might expect, because he's still on the cheap side. And he is a relevant pass catcher with 20 catches, 150 yards, and a touchdown. Also rushed for 401 and 7. So Allen's definitely, when Schrader's struggling, the guy that they're getting the ball to. But the FSU side is really intriguing to me for GPPs, because I don't think a lot of people are going to look to go there. Jordan Travis didn't have to do a lot against Virginia Tech. They ended up just basically crushing them and running the ball down their throat repeatedly. So Travis didn't have the GPP game that I thought he might have. I don't mind going back to him in large field again, because the Syracuse right now, man, you know, offense struggling, but also their defense, which has done well against lower tier competition. Hooray. They haven't done that well against quarterbacks on upper tier teams. I mean, Drake May just scored 4 touchdowns against them, 1 rushing, 3 passing, 440 42 passing yards. So the May, Jaden Daniels combo, if you got there, you definitely went nuts. Cade Klubnik, who I'm not a big fan of. I know you're not that high on him. He threw for 270 and 2 against them. And then Hudson Card scored 2 touchdowns and 330 yards against them. So not the biggest name quarterbacks in the world, but, Jordan Travis probably on par, maybe a little bit, better than Klubnik at least, can definitely do some damage in this matchup. So I like Travis a lot as a GPP guy that a lot of people just aren't going to get there because of his price. We did see Trey Benson finally break out, 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. Just make a note, a DVP note. Anytime Virginia Tech's on the slate, just take the lead back. If they run a committee, just take them both because there is no chance of them stopping any running backs for the rest of the season. It's going to be like, was it like 2 years ago in Missouri with like the worst rush defense in the world? Like you could just take multiple running backs against them and they couldn't stop anyone. That's what this Virginia Tech team is turning into. And our even vulture that we mentioned, like Toafili's going to have this game. He rushed for 50 yards and a touchdown. So he did get in the action too, but Benson was definitely the focal point there. 7-2, it's kind of a tough price to get there, I think, against Syracuse, but he's definitely in play for GPPs. However, I would prioritize Travis over him if you want Florida State exposure. They do have some pretty fun options. Johnny Wilson, 36 targets. Our guy Keon Coleman with 33. Coleman with 6 touchdowns. He's up there with Roman Wilson at this point for touchdowns. 20 catches, 278 yards. Johnny Wilson, 20 catches, 357 yards. Both priced up over 6K, but if you run Travis, I would certainly recommend running at least one of those guys in your GPP lineup. And then Jaheim Bell may be a bit of a sneak. He was limited last week. I think he played like 5 snaps or something like that. Had a great week of practice. There's a lot of hype around him, getting him back into it. There's going to be some talk about using him on earlier downs. They've been really giving him touches in the red zone and kind of like in third down situations, but they're planning to use him in the slot from what I've read and using him on earlier downs. So if we get some more targets, especially slot targets for Jaheim Bell, he could have a chance to have a really big game against the Syracuse team. So it's a luxury game on a slate like this, and nobody is a priority, but those are the options, I think, for Florida State, at least, getting a little bit of exposure there for large field GPPs, where I think they have a chance to break out and not have very much exposure or not have very much ownership. So that is where I am at with that one. Do you have anything you want to add?
I like the Jordan Travis potential, man. I mean, yeah, they made Drake May look like a potential, top 3 pick. He looked amazing, and so could see shades of that. Also, the Johnny Wilson thing, a little bit banged up, maybe. And so if there's any kind of smoke about him being not a full go or maybe going to be a decoy, that kind of thing. Keon Coleman coming off of like the one bad Keon Coleman game, pretty good spot for him to be low owned and go absolutely bonkers. So don't mind him as a pairing option with Jordan Travis at all.
For sure. And that 6.9 price will keep people off, definitely. All right, moving on here, we have Arkansas versus Alabama. The Alabama 20-point favorites, a total of 47. Arkansas defensively, they're a bit susceptible to some fantasy goodness. Take it away, Jake.
Yeah, man. So the mediocre Bama offense. It's a weird reality. It's a weird thing to say, but like that's kind of where we are at with no Bryce Young back there, and Jaden Milroe kind of still figuring out who he wants to be and how he wants to play it. He's been a little bit better the last couple weeks, putting up some consistency and maybe he's turning a corner. I definitely can't get there at 8-4 to him. And then the backs, it's kind of, one of those things like, they're pricing Jace McClellan down to the point that like I'm getting kind of tempted. Like I don't want to use him, but it's like I don't know. He's in that 6K range, but just not seeing 20 touch volume out of him the way that you would want to, or the way that we maybe more traditionally got out of Brian Robinson type backs, and there's not really a Josh Jacobs type. Like it's just there's too much. Kind of like the Ohio State thing we're talking about. It's just too many guys taking carries. We did see a breakout game from a Bama wide receiver in Jermaine Burton against A&M last week, and so if there is a place to go in this game on the Bama side, like just insane Marvin Harrison level volume, 9 catches, 197 yards, and 2 touchdowns for Jermaine Burton against what isn't the world's easiest defense in A&M, and I think he'll have an even more enticing matchup against Arkansas. I am a little bit interested in it. I don't think it necessarily is going to be like a super chalky play because there just hasn't been that consistency going into last week. But that was just, that kind of volume. How can you not go back to it if you're Nick Saban, right? So I'm going to put him down as like a guy I'm interested in. I'm not going to necessarily prioritize him or jam him into lineups, but it is, at an elevated enough price point that, I think he's not somebody a lot of people will get to, with Rome Odunze being in, a little bit above that range, but Jalen McMillan being like right there, Keon Coleman being right there, Johnny Wilson being right there. Like, I don't think a lot of people are necessarily going to go to Jermaine Burton. Maybe I'm totally wrong about that, but it just seems like outside of that one game, I don't think people are going to be super on him. And I think it is an interesting play. Rocket Sanders, I feel like, man, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like has had some good games against Alabama in his career. And at 5'7" and like kind of starting to get his legs under him, it being the Alabama game, I feel like maybe he shows up, but it's a tough call to use anybody against an Alabama defense. Like, yes, they are more susceptible than in years past, but they're still Alabama, and you're fighting the teeth of a pretty decent defense there. So again, not a priority, but somebody to consider. I don't think I can get to KJ at 7-7, and I don't know that I'm super interested in any of the Arkansas receivers. Andrew Armstrong has been remarkably consistent, but he's been consistent in like the Xavier Worthy way, where he's kind of getting that like 60 to 80 yards, 5 to 8 catches. Maybe he scores, maybe he doesn't. Hasn't really had like a super blow up game, and I don't know that we get there against Bama in particular. Isaac Tesla has had some potential, but they're just not really going to him lately. There's not a ton that I want to get to in the Arkansas passing game. Ty Washington came out of nowhere and could potentially be a source of value, but again, that's going to be like super narrow, right? Like, I don't necessarily know that we're going to get a ton of volume in consolidated into any one receiver against Bama. I think their defense is too good for that. But at 4-3, especially if you break a long one there, that kind of gets you to value. So he's kind of in that Cincinnati tight end game. If you need a value piece,
yeah,
you're at that 4 to 4,500 range, and definitely a guy to consider, but not a guy that I need to force into every lineup in this scenario. So I think for me, probably mainly Jermaine Burton from this game, but even him, I'm not like putting in the core or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Washington, because their normal tight end Luke Haas has a broken clavicle apparently, and that is something that KJ, he's mobile, but he's been kind of quick on his reads and a little panicky. You'd think he'd be calm by now in this point of his career, and he's making a lot of safer throws to the tight ends. And Ty Washington kind of stepped in there, played that tight end one role and did pretty well. So he might be somebody to kind of keep an eye on going forward, just because of the way they utilize the tight end. But yeah, a tough ask for sure on the road against Bama. And now that they see what he's capable of, they're probably going to be able to contain him. So, and I will say about the Bama running backs, it's crazy because every year it's like, yeah, we got to have these guys. They're these high volume, but I'm just so out on Jace McClellan that the 6'3" is still not cheap enough for me. Like if he starts sliding into the mid-5 range, then I'll maybe start looking. But for
Like,
right now,
can you imagine if Jahmyr Gibbs was 6'3" against Arkansas last year? Like, that would have been the biggest smash of the season. And it's just like, now it's like, I'm not sure.
No, and it's like Roydell Williams has every opportunity to like seize the gig, but he can't do anything either. So it's just really such a weird offense this year. All right. And I saw a little bit of ownership early projections on Milroe, but I'm out on him too. So I'm with you. If like Milroe and Emory Jones end up like the two quarterbacks that a good chunk of the field is using. I mean, obviously Penix and stuff, but if people are using those guys, then I feel actually pretty decent about this slate. If I lose to those guys, so be it. But that just feels real bad. All right, next game here we're going to talk about is Indiana, Michigan, another just absolute barn buster. 33-point favorite is Michigan, 46 total. On the Indiana side, it's really kind of tough to get too excited. Even when they have good matchups, it's pretty tough to get excited. I really kind of, try to make up these notes about these teams in bad spots and find some really exciting play. And, really Jalen Lucas, your guy, like he's kind of cooled off the last couple of games. Had he been coming into this game red hot and be like, well, maybe we can heat check him, but he's really just been kind of awful. And the whole team has this in general. So I don't even feel like they're going to score 10 points in this game against Michigan. So I'm off Indiana. I won't waste anyone's time there. As far as Michigan goes, J.J. McCarthy's he's fairly safe. He's like the 2022, 21 Sean Clifford from Penn State. He's going to get you the 20, 25 fantasy points at this point. Probably won't go too far over, but won't go too far under as well. If you're looking for a safe guy, he's okay. He could easily get it done versus Hoosiers defense, though. Like he's literally showing himself to be off a little bit more mobility than we thought. He's rushed for 130 yards, 3 touchdowns on 20 carries, which is a YPC of 6.7. Pretty solid, not taking a lot of sacks either. Thrown for 1,300 yards and 11 touchdowns. So he's been solid for sure. Now, talk about guys like you said, McClellan. If it gets to a day where he's like 5K or something, we'll be like, damn, what can we do here? But we're staring at this price for Donovan Edwards, who has been really bad this year, even when given the opportunity. Even when he's getting receptions and playing in the passing game, he's still really not doing a whole lot as part of after the catch and yardage. But he's 4.9K. So dynamic of a player. Maybe the injury from last year and being banged up really hurt him worse than we thought. These kids and these players come back from these injuries, serious injuries that used to be career enders like 20 years ago. And we kind of overlook that or maybe take that for granted. And then sometimes these guys come back and they're just not the same. Probably still a deep GPP play even at 4.9, but man, it's just so unfathomable to not want to play him at 4.9. 4 carries last week for 20 yards only, but was targeted 5 times in the passing game, 4 catches, 25 yards. Again, nothing super exciting, but his relevance as a pass catcher certainly makes him viable on DK, where PPR points can rack up in a hurry, where if he gets like 7 or 8 receptions, sure, maybe he only got 40 yards, but that's going to be a ton of points really quickly for a sub 5K player. So I'm kind of interested. I'm not prioritizing him by any means, but I don't know. I can't seem to quit Donovan Edwards, and right now he's definitely in my player pool. Another game in which Blake Corum is probably going to score twice and then sit down in most of the second half. The 8-4 tag will probably keep him relatively low owned. He has scored 20+ fantasy points in 3 other blowouts, so it's not like he can't get it done. It's just the opportunity cost there is so massive, and we have to really get these Husky players in, a couple of Kansas players and stuff like that. So it's going to be tough to really invest an 8-4 price tag, even though Corum could easily score 3 times even in this game if they keep punching it in. I was a week early on my Colston Loveland anytime touchdown call. He did score a 24-yard touchdown last week against Minnesota. That hurt my heart because I really needed that the week before. Still no competition for touches. He's the tight end one, going to get all the snaps in the world that he can handle. 16 catches, 200 yards. Finally got his touchdown this year on 21 targets. Still like him, sub 5K. He is certainly worth a shot if you're looking for some GPP players to kind of build out your player pool there on any alt builds. Corny Johnson, 18 catches, 342 yards, and a touchdown on 24 targets. And then you have brand favorite Roman Wilson, 382 yards, 8 touchdowns on 29 targets, caught 22 of those. Those guys both have upside in this spot. Again, not a prioritization type of spot for us to be looking at, but Michigan's definitely going to score points here. They've been kind of stagnant throughout, especially in the running game. So I do feel like they could use this as an opportunity to just pop like literally 40 or 50 points on them, which is a lot for Michigan. And really kind of remind people how good they can be. And it wouldn't surprise me if one of Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards ended up having a big game. I just don't trust either of them to do so. And it's not because of Corum's not good. And it's not because of Edwards won't get the opportunity. It's just kind of the opportunity might not be there for a full game for Corum. And I'm not sure if Edwards is even any good anymore. So we'll see what happens with that. It is a game that I will be paying attention to as much as possible in the early going. What do you think about that one before we move on?
JJ McCarthy, rushing touchdown extraordinaire.
Yeah.
I think, look, I'm the last guy to ever want to use JJ McCarthy, but man, he's showing a nose for the end zone, and maybe he wants to start getting some of the limelight. I don't know that this is the spot for it, but that offense can't really be stopped, and that defense sure gets them the ball back pretty quick. So, maybe this isn't the week, but maybe we're going to start using him sooner than later. And I don't know. It's not a game I'm super interested in any particular piece of, other than, like you mentioned, 4.9 Donovan Edwards seems ridiculous. But same token, Indiana has actually contained some running backs. So I'm probably just going to stay away from this one.
Yeah, and ECU, and this whole debacle with the Michigan running back started against ECU when they contained them. And I've been watching, and ECU played today, and they shut down another group of running backs from SMU today. They've only given up 100-yard game this season to Nate Noel. That ECU rush defense, man, they're giant killers. So it all started with them. Just want to point that out when it's going forward. All right, next game, another really appealing fantasy game. No, not really. California versus Utah. 11.5 point favorite is Utah. 44 total. Another brutal one. I didn't try to give you all of these low totals on purpose. I took a few myself. They're just plentiful on this slate. In the past, targeting against California would be really fun and optimal, but this Utah team, man, they're injured all the time. Their players are inconsistent. It just feels like an awful game. So what do you got for us on this one? Give me some fantasy goodness.
So you never know who Cal's going to roll out at quarterback. They just kind of pull a guy out of somewhere. And last week it was Fernando Mendoza against Oregon State. And he was amazing. Like, you just out of nowhere kept – I mean, not that the game was overly competitive, but, kept Cal in the game to the point that Oregon State had to keep scoring, which is great if you rostered Jack Belling like I did. It was kind of nice to see Cal stay in it and make that one competitive. I assume he gets the start again. I don't think Cal has scored 40 points in a few presidential administrations. So I feel like they have no choice but to start him again. I don't know that they will, because they kind of seem to just start whoever they want at quarterback. But if we get the word that Fernando Mendoza is starting at 6'1", dual threat quarterback going into Utah, it seems like it might end like Dante Moore and just completely be nothing. But he does have that upside. Put up 23 fantasy points, in his first start ever, completed 70% of his passes and ran the ball 4 times for 41 yards. There are worse things that you could get out of a quarterback at 6'1", and this also wouldn't be his first start. By the same token, we don't even know if he's starting, so you got to keep an eye on that. And then Jaden Ott should be back for this one. I don't necessarily know that I want to pay 8.2 for any kind of running back against Utah, especially when his backup, Isaiah Fonzie, looked amazing against Oregon State. And actually has not the first time he's looked amazing. He's had some productive games even as a backup thus far this season. 11 for 86 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then another score through the air against Oregon State. Very involved, very capable. Don't know that I can deploy him because he's 5'9", and he might not even be getting the bulk of the touches. but he might be getting just enough touches to pilfer from Jaden Ott. And then when you go to the Cal receiver room, obviously Jeremiah Hunter is the first name that comes to mind. Had a pretty good game against Arizona State, kind of fell off a little bit against Oregon State. Grizzle took some volume, and really it was just kind of spreading the ball around with Mendoza being kind of the lead guy, and then also Afonso getting the bulk of the scoring done. So it's an interesting spot for Cal, just because the guys are pretty low priced and definitely not going to be owned. But it's also a very tall task. Playing Oregon State at home is one thing. Going into Utah against a pretty tough defense is entirely a different thing, and I'm not sure we can get there. On the other side of it, I would love to, like you said, I would love to target anybody against Cal, and even more so, Cal gave up 3 touchdowns to Jack Valley, Oregon State's tight end, and so logic would hold like, oh, well, maybe we can use a Utah tight end against Cal, and he's going to just absolutely nuke the slate. The problem there is that Utah has 75 tight ends, and we don't know exactly who that's going to be. It would be really nice if Brant Guthrie would show up and get healthy. I guess Veli would be kind of the guy to use in that scenario. But then there's also Yasmin and like, I don't know, they're all going to go for like 3 catches and 75 yards somehow. It's a weird spot. Utah's a weird team. A lot of inconsistency. I guess if you're going to try to pay down there, you end up going with Yasmin, and he did pretty well against Oregon State when Utah played him. 359-1, but not a lot of consistency on the season. It's pretty tough for me to get to like a Money Parks, who hasn't seen volume but yet maintains being expensive. And I don't know, man. Maybe you have that diamond in the rough of the Utah pass catchers, but to me, it's kind of like playing the roulette wheel, and other than Yasmin being 3.8, you're not even really getting much of a discount on any of them. And also, we don't necessarily know who's starting a quarterback. Like, yeah, it's probably not going to be Cam Rising because he's been hurt all season, and I don't think he's even really practiced. But at the same time, who knows? It's Utah. Crazy stuff happens. And so that leaves the Utah running game, which is equally frustrating. I don't necessarily know if we're going to get a completely healthy Jaquindon Jackson. If we do at 5'6", and they are like, yes, he's the guy, he's a full go, he's going to get 18 carries, that seems like a really good opportunity. I think it's probably slim to none that we get that kind of clarity on Utah. So if you have a strong feeling about anyone in this game on Utah, by all means, exercise that strong feeling. But for me, it's really tough to commit to anyone in particular. It's a rough thing to say as an analyst, but that's just the way that I feel about this Utah team. So who you got as a Utah dart?
Well, let's start with I'm happy that Nate Johnson is 7.5 because then I don't have to worry about fading like a 5K. Nate Johnson will do just enough to pay that price. So that's number one. I'm happy because I do think he could actually play pretty well with his mobility against this Cal defense. Running backs wise, I do kind of like Glover, but you mentioned Jackson could play. Maybe he's not. It's not like Glover's doing much with the volume anyways. He's had, well over 15 carries in the last 2 games and hasn't generated over 100 yards on either. So pretty tough to get excited about anyone. The only player I'd even want to use would be Brant Guthrie, but he hasn't gotten there yet. Cam Rising hasn't gotten there yet. Like, the season's just slipping away for this Utah team that can't seem to get healthy. But on paper, the matchup against Cal is phenomenal. And if they had a healthy group, they could definitely be viable. I do think it's worth taking some shots in GPPs. I mean, you mentioned Yasmin, who looks pretty decent. I've seen Bailey do it in the past. Parks, there are some guys to possibly take shots at for deep GPP, but I'm certainly not looking to use anybody from this game. And I really hope that people try to get cute and maybe like, if Ott's too banged up, like, oh, let's use Isaiah Founts, but he's gotten extreme. Like, I don't want to call anyone lucky or anything, but his touches have been super lucky. If you watch Cal games, like, it's just ridiculous the way he's doing it. They need to give King Guru some love there in Cal. But yeah, this game absolutely sucks. I will say, I heard you took a shot at my guy Dante Moore, who wasn't good. But last week against WSU, he got the volume, 44 pass attempts, threw for 300 yards, and they got the win. So his volume is going up there for my guy Dante Moore. This game is ready to go away. Let's move on to the next one. Georgia versus Vanderbilt. Another huge spread, 31.5-point favorites, but the total is 56. So we've got another like semi blowout with a higher total, which is interesting. For the Georgia side, Carson Beck. It's time to start talking about Carson Beck. Sounds like a future news show host or something, but man, the industry is going to have to start recognizing him because he is playing really well. Damn near 400 yards and 4 touchdowns against Kentucky. That's impressive. I know Kentucky's defense isn't necessarily like the steel curtain, but they're adequate, and the way that he undressed them was crazy to see because Kentucky was riding high after the win the week before that, especially with the way Ray Davis had played. Third straight game in which he's eclipsed the 300-yard mark, which is kind of quietly doing that. I don't know that anyone outside of Georgia is even realizing that he's playing this well. Right now, he's just under 2,000 yards, 13 total touchdowns, 11 passing, a little bit of rushing, 2 rushing touchdowns through 6 games. So he's pacing quite well. It's crazy because in competitive games, which they've only had 2 through the 6, was against South Carolina and Auburn, in which they won by 14 against South Carolina and I believe like 17 against Auburn, somewhere in there. Didn't register 20 fantasy points in either of those games. But in games in which they won by 30-plus points, he's hit 34-plus fantasy points. So he likes the blowout wins, I guess. Kentucky and UAB especially, he went completely ballistic against both of them. So he's pretty, to me, I feel like he's getting closer to the elite tier large field GPP play, like sub 3% ownership we're talking here. I'm not going to be using him myself unless I have like, a couple of alt lineups. I'm kind of just rolling like 2 to 3 lately. So I don't know that I'll be able to pay the almost 9K price point for him, but it's definitely time to recognize that, hey, this guy is putting up some huge, huge numbers in conference play here. And if the game's competitive against Vanderbilt, which it probably won't be, then maybe he won't put up those big numbers. But I thought that was kind of interesting. The running back room for Georgia, similar to Alabama, right? Like we used to be able, and they've always had like multiple backs in there, but usually you had one who could grind it out, get touchdowns in the red zone, third down guy, and then you had like a pass catching back. And typically you thought like, okay, Deshaun Edwards and Kendall Milton, those two are going to feed off each other, work off each other. But Kendall Milton hasn't really been doing a whole lot with the touches he's getting, and he's not really a factor in the passing game whatsoever. You look at the snaps right now, Edwards is playing 53% of them, Milton down to 23%. So it's almost as if like he's getting phased out in a way. And I feel like Edwards is not only like the not the bell cow, but like the primary back in short yardage, red zone, all that. But he's also establishing himself as a top pass catcher. Not that he's getting a ton of targets, but he's the only back that's really catching passes on the team as well. I don't particularly like the idea of paying 7K for him, almost 7K, but Vanderbilt defense, they're not going to provide a ton of resistance. I feel like if he gets enough touches, he could definitely hit 100+ and a couple of touchdowns, but it's just a matter of will he get enough touches to matter. So I'm not there with either of them, but that's kind of the situation with the running backs for Georgia. In the receiver room, Brock Bowers has completely exploded. Price has also exploded, rightfully so. You look at his first 3 games, 13 catches, 134 yards, 0 touchdowns. Pretty much what we see out of Bowers is like the first half of the season. He plays the first half of each games. Sometimes he'll put up a 20, but a lot of times he's not that relevant. And then you see like the last quarter of the season, you got to play Brock Bowers like every single game because he goes off. Seems to me he's doing this thing earlier, though, because you look at the last 3 games, 24 catches, 410 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So 3 straight games over 100 yards. He's been absolutely phenomenal. Starting earlier this year, he can't really, for draft stock and all these other stuff, awards, whatever, start super late. He's going to have to start putting some stats on the board, and he clearly has done that and gone into what I call God tier mode because he just can't be defended. Kyle Pitts, everybody's super jacked about him coming out of Florida and like, hey, this guy can't be defended. He's a freak. Brock Bowers is a freak of nature, and really nobody at the collegiate level has any chance to defend him, especially even in the SEC, which you'd think there would be with all those first-round draft picks that are coming out of the defense. So he's clicking. Like him, leads the team in targets by a really large margin, 47 total, 37 catches, 550 yards, 4 touchdowns. So when I'm looking at Georgia, it's really Bowers or bust. There are some other options here that are at least like, hey, Dom Lovett at 5'8", he's playable. There's still Ra Thomas, was really good last year for Mississippi State. Against Kentucky, he did look okay. 5 catches, 63 yards, and a touchdown. Might he start? That's his first double-digit fantasy point game of the season. Maybe he starts being relevant as well. But really, if you're going anywhere here, you're just going to find that 7-4 and play Bowers because this Vanderbilt defense is woeful, and they are going to get absolutely dominated by Georgia. Another one where I don't think that the team will score 10 points on the other side in Vanderbilt, and Georgia's just going to end up putting up like 50. On the Vanderbilt side, though, we can really just skip to one player only who maybe blowout immune, and if anything, game script-wise, a blowout would work for him, right? But Will Sheppard has really proven himself to be good against any opponent. We talked about it, last week, kind of backed off of him like, hey, Florida, it's not the greatest spot. And he wasn't super targeted, but he did make the most of those with 3 catches, 107 yards, and a touchdown, one of which was 85 yards. So most of that on 1 catch. But still, he continues to be relevant. 22 fantasy points. Week before that, 21. He had a game earlier this season of 28. So he's just really heavily involved, and he's really efficient with the touches that he does get. They do have other options, right, with Jaden McGowan, Skinner. London Humphreys has started to establish himself, especially recently. He had a couple of big games there against UNLV and Wake Forest. But for the most part, we're not touching anyone on this team. And it's not as if Will Sheppard's like 4.7. The pricing here on DK has started to normalize a little bit, which is a good thing. But at 6K, I wouldn't completely write him off either because if Vanderbilt scores more than 0, it's a 50-50 if they will. They're probably going to be Will Sheppard scoring a touchdown for them, if anything. So that is my take on Vanderbilt. Not going to even get into playing Kenny Seals. The running back thing, our boy Cedric Alexander's 4-1, but no thank you. Not against Vanderbilt. Didn't even get the amount of work that we were hoping in the receiving game last week anyways. So it's really just about Brock Bowers here for me if I can find enough value on the rest of the slate, which I'm really hoping you're able to unearth some of that value for me as we get into these later games. Where are you at with Bowers now? It's like, I know we haven't been using him as much like we did the last few seasons. Do you feel like, we had the cheap week for him where he's super chalk a couple weeks ago. Is it time to kind of be like, well, if I wasn't using him last week, I'm probably not using him this week at 7.4, or do you feel okay paying up now?
I mean, Georgia's going to be able to do whatever they want. And I think the first half will be a lot of Bowers and Edwards. And so you're going to, if you fade, you're going to go, oh my goodness, what did I do? Right? Like, because they're going to both put up 100 yards and a touchdown by the second quarter. And you're like, oh no. Vanderbilt has no chance of sticking with them, like just none. And so if anything, I think it's more of like hey, what if it's Ladd McConkey instead that gets involved? Yes, Bowers needs to put up his numbers for draft stock, but I don't think there's anybody that thinks Brock Bowers isn't the number 1 tight end by far. And they're going to need Ladd McConkey when it comes to true SEC play, not Vanderbilt SEC play, right? And so I think that the kind of sexy leverage play is to go Ladd McConkey on this one. You got to get his feet under him and get him going too. And he's 5'9", it's quite a bit of savings from Bowers, and is just as capable of having that 100-yard and a touchdown first half as Bowers is, right? And so I'm kind of interested in going that direction. Yes, Bowers is an absolute stud, and could he get to 202? Yeah, he probably could if they're throwing all game. I just think it's, foot off the gas, and whoever scores those points in the first half good for them for scoring those points, but I don't think they're going to have the same capability to add to it that you would need for a guy like Bowers at 7.4 to hit his ceiling. Like, he needs 30 points for that to pay off. And he's done that pretty much each of the last 3 weeks. 2 of those not in particularly competitive games. So it's possible, but it's asking him to hit his ceiling, which, if the first 2 touchdowns go to Ladd McConkey, well, you're not going to get that many more opportunities, right? Like, Vanderbilt will have the ball for 3 to 5 minutes, and then they'll give the ball right back, and they're probably going to run the ball a good amount too. And so it's like it's a can you get there in 2 quarters, Brock Bowers? And that's a tough ask. So I definitely get the play. I understand it. And if you were like 6'6", 6'7", I'm probably a little bit more inclined to get there. I want so many bullets for that Oregon-Washington game. I don't know that I can get there for a guy that's pretty much guaranteed to only have 2 real quarters of usage.
Yeah, and it is one of those tough things where, you play the fade because he's not going to play the second half, and we've been there so many times in college football with a multitude of players, and it's like, damn, this guy got 40 in 3 quarters, so it's definitely scary. And I like the idea of playing someone else. McConkey's nice. I don't know. I like Ra Thomas. I kind of feel like I need to get some exposure there, but definitely on the same page there with looking at some leverage. All right, next one, Ohio State versus Purdue. It's no accident. I always give you Ohio State because you always have some good insight there. 19-point favorites, another not so competitive game, total of 50.5. It's in the 50s, but Ohio State, man, they're probably going to drill this Purdue team. Makes it kind of tough, but we're in the same situation that we are in several other games on this slate. So what are we doing here?
Okay, so Ohio State at Purdue is always weird. It's just always not necessarily like in the way you expect. It always ends up being a weird game. Yes, logic would indicate that Ohio State will just absolutely steamroll Purdue. But this is one of those games where there's going to be like a blocked field goal that gets returned for a touchdown, and then Purdue tries something crazy and, gets an onside kick, and all of a sudden they have the ball again. And I see this being a weirdly and unnecessarily competitive game for Ohio State. And also, let's go back to Kyle McCord just is not it. He's not going to get Ohio State to the ceiling that they're accustomed to being. He did a good job of getting a lot of volume to Marvin Harrison, but that was also because we had an injured Emeka Egbuka, and so like the volume was kind of forced down Marvin Harrison's throat. We do get Travion Henderson back, and he's come down in price slightly, or more or less the same price. That was a little bit unfortunate because I think we spent a good amount of time on like, hey, is this the Travion Henderson breakout game that we've been waiting to happen? And like it's set up for such a good spot for them to deploy him against Maryland last week, and can the Ohio State lead back get 20 carries? Can they deploy him for those 20 carries? And we thought that was going to happen, and it did happen, but that lead back was Chip Trayanum.
Hell yeah.
And so it was cool for us because Chip Trayanum was quite a bit less expensive than Travion was, but I still kind of wanted to see that breakout game happen. I think if we get this as a competitive back and forth game, we might see Travion get in there for 20 carries. Although coming off an injury, it'll take it being a competitive game for him to get to that volume ceiling. I think the efficiency ceiling will be there regardless. I think this is the kind of defense that he can absolutely eat up and may get some work in the passing game too. Screen passes, that kind of thing, are the one thing that Kyle McCord has shown that he can do. So I'm going to kind of go back to the well with that. When the guy you call out for having a really good opportunity to get some volume doesn't play at all, a little bit disappointing. But Doesn't mean that I don't think he can get there this week. And, if he is starting and he is getting that volume, means we are unfortunately going to be off of a 5K chip train, which would have been a really good piece to slide in for some value if he were starting and getting a 20 carry game, which he's not. So I am still going to be interested in Travion. That, does some damage to the salary that you would otherwise allocate to those high total games. But I think there's a decent chance, I'm more interested in him than I am in a Bowers, just because I think this game, rationally or otherwise, stays a little bit more competitive. Now Harrison, he's 8.5. His price is actually down. This is the lowest price that we've seen him all season. Ibuka probably not 100% healthy for this one. This just becomes a question of how much do you think Kyle McCord can get him the ball? Obviously, force fed him, a bunch of targets. However, like Jermaine Burton had the same game as him last week, and actually, scored twice as opposed to just once, and he's like almost 2K cheaper, and so I don't feel the same way about Harrison as I do about Bowers. I think Bowers has to get there in a certain amount of time. I think Harrison will be competitive throughout the game, and that he will be playing. I just think that he doesn't have the same kind of quarterback or the same kind of efficiency that Bowers will. So it is a luxury play to get to Harrison. Of the two, I think I would probably rather lean Henderson than Harrison. Bringing it back the other way, we've seen some flashes from Deion Burks. We haven't seen anything like week 1 against Fresno State. We have seen a modicum of decent games from Yassine, and I don't know that this is really the spot for him. He hasn't really been getting the volume as of late. TJ Sheffield is actually the guy that's come on, and at 4.7, he is an interesting run back. If you want to, let's say you are going to use Henderson and you want to save some money in one of your receiver slots, that would be a pretty interesting way to correlate that. I feel like Burks is going to be, as the highest priced receiver, he's probably going to be the most popular run back. As I do, people probably tend to remember and lock in that first game of the season against Fresno State, but he realistically hasn't done anything like that since. I think TJ Sheffield, 693-1 against Iowa is no joke. That's an impressive performance. And I think there's, if anybody is going to make it that weird game, it might be TJ Sheffield. So, if using Henderson, get him in there too, maybe as a one-off, kind of dart mid forward play that we do well with on this show. TJ Sheffield for Purdue. As far as the running backs go on the Purdue side, well, I should just say I'm not using Hudson Card, my weekly Hudson Card commentary. Not going to get there, but the running game, Maccabee, realistically, the volume should have me in at 5.2. Running backs have struggled against Ohio State, and just not a ton, that they've been able to get going. I think he's going to have to get a lot of work in the passing game, and if he does, you could obviously get there if you get that one long play, break it open kind of thing. I would rather do it through TJ Sheffield than Maccabee. I think they're going to be slinging it to the outside more than they're going to be pounding the rock on the inside or running screen passes and that kind of thing. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the Purdue side of this one?
Yeah, so the only benefit there for Maccabee is the fact that Tyrone Tracy is banged up to the point where it sounds like he's not going to play, which is unfortunate because he was looking pretty good there in that role they were using him. So the touches will be there for him, whether that's on short passes or straight carry. So it is a nice price at 5.2, but I agree. I don't know that there's enough upside there for me to get excited about. Hudson Card at 5.2. I would love to see, Hudson Card's been chalked like 3 times this year. I haven't used him on any of those chalk slates. I haven't used him actually even once, and it hasn't hurt me. So I don't mind if people go there because the whole game script will say he has to throw a lot. He's just not very good. Don't hate that Sheffield call by any means either, but probably mostly off of the Purdue side. If anything, I would probably go to Maccabee, but I'm doing this thing where I'm trying to stay away from low ceiling running backs right now, and he would definitely qualify for that. Additionally, Mayan Williams, you can stick a fork in him because he is done. 6 carries last week without Henderson. He is not usable whatsoever. Crazy.
Despite what Ryan Day might say.
Yeah, coach speak. I wanted to bring that up too. Coach speak. It happens way more in college basketball because all the time. Coach, we're going to give this guy, 40 minutes. We're gonna bring this guy along slowly, and then they do the opposite. And then sometimes they do the opposite of the opposite. And it's just the coach speak always f's the DFS community, and I don't know how many people actually fall for that one, but he wasn't the play. Whoever went there. So I just wanted to bring that up that he is done. All right, moving on to the next game here. And this could be a pretty fun one. I don't know. I mean, total's kind of high, I guess. We're talking about Oregon versus Washington. Highest total on the slate at 62. Should be 70. Could have made it 80. It's going to go well over that. So if you guys are looking for some bets here, the over 62 is a very easy bet. Washington 3.5-point favorites. The first real chance for the rest of the country that doesn't either live in the Pacific Northwest or doesn't bet or play DFS to see Michael Penix in a high-profile game here against Oregon. You mentioned Gabriel as a Heisman hopeful. Penix is definitely on the board for Heisman. I love this matchup for him against the Oregon Clucks. Hate them with a passion. The bad game he had against Arizona in Week 5 was like some people's best game. No, he didn't have any touchdowns, but he still completed 30 of his 40 passes for 360 yards. So a lot of people would love to have a bad game like that. This is almost a shoe-in guarantee that Penix is going to throw for, a 350-yard floor, 3 touchdowns. Like the Oregon defense has been somewhat decent at times, but they will not be decent against this Washington offense. You look at what they did to Stanford, I know, and then even look at how they shut down Colorado. And Colorado, there was a lot of like this hype and just Oregon had a lot of bulletin board material. And I know some people don't believe in that stuff, but if you played sports at all or followed it, like that stuff is real, man. Like, and they had plenty of that to kind of go up and be like, you know what, we need to shut this Colorado program up. And they really have done a good job, held Hawaii to 10. Obviously, they played Portland State and they dropped 80 on them. But the Texas Tech game shows you that, their defense does have holes. They gave up 30 to them during that time. That was when Shuck was still not injured. He rushed for 100 yards on them. Penix isn't going to do that, but he threw 3 touchdowns, almost 300 yards. I'm really, really confident in Penix having a huge, huge game. Now, he's 10.2K. If we're going to, get away from Harrison, who obviously very, very good player, very expensive, or Henderson, who you mentioned, or Blake Corum, who we've talked about, there's some expense, or Brock Bowers. There's going to be some difficulties fitting these guys because so far we haven't really unearthed any hey, this value is really, really good. We're all over it. We still have some games left. And I like to set it up as a mystery, but Penix is a must click in and play. Not telling you guys anything you don't know. He's probably going to be silly high owned. I'm getting kind of tired of these huge slates, 12 to 14 games, and we have not 1, not 2, not even 3, but 4 to 5 guys who are 30% plus. It's actually getting a little bit tiring. They need to get the pricing figured out. If people are looking at Penix as oh, that's too much money, I can't spend it. I would love it. I do think he'll carry a chunk of ownership though. Then you look at his weapons. We'll start with the running game because I get a lot of questions about the running back situation here. Because when Dylan Johnson, came to town, it was a lot of he's going to take over and be the guy. And I was like, well, maybe, yeah, he's got the pass catching ability. Then he kind of fell off. They had their younger guys play. But that last game against Arizona, in which Penix, he couldn't find the end zone, but Dylan Johnson could. 2 touchdowns there, caught 5 passes for 50 yards, which is what we're accustomed to from his time in the SEC last year. A pass-catching running back, really versatile. Somebody who's definitely in play in the, if you're fading, my man Mike, then it would make sense to play Johnson and just hope that he's going to find the end zone. I don't like him as much against Oregon for what it's worth, just because their rush defense has been better, but he's certainly in play. There are other guys I could see kind of pilfering touchdowns, perhaps like Sam Adams, if they get him carries again. Like I love Sam Adams, Tybo Rogers. Like there's some real talent in this running back room, but nobody really that we can look at outside of Dylan Johnson, and the 5.8 price tag's really not that beefy for me or that exciting. The wide receiver situation, we've got expensive guys, and this is where DK at least has begun pricing people appropriately and making it difficult. Because again, you just don't plug in like a 5K roam anymore. 7.9, you're really being put to the test if you're going to play him. Jalen McMillan, who has missed a couple of games here. It does sound like he's going to go. We'll monitor that because I've been kind of paying attention to the local media here this week, and there's some conflicting reports. Could be coach speak, but right now it sounds like Jalen McMillan is going to play, which definitely affects things. If he doesn't, I think, yeah, you can play Rome, but if you need the savings, you can just lock in Jalen Pope. And even if McMillan does play, like Pope's been really productive, even with McMillan and somebody that you could play. I liked him a little bit better in the low to mid 5K range, but at 6'1", if you just can't make the salary work, you got to have a Husky receiver with my man Mike, then, I don't mind doing a Pope there. If McMillan were to sit out, we could even go down to 4.6 and look at Jeremy Bernard. It is a bit of a chase because of his reception work there. He's super fast, one of the fastest guys on the team, actually. They get him carries. They try to work and get him the ball because he can break a big play at any time. And most of his touchdowns this season, I believe he has 3. 2 of them have been rushing. So they're looking for ways to get him the rock. Definitely like Jeremy Bernard. My man Denzel Boston, who was super hyped in the offseason by me, hasn't done that much yet, but he is getting more snaps. He's on the uptick, and that's somebody else at 3.6 to maybe consider if you're running like 50-plus lineups. So that's kind of the report on the Huskies there. Penix with one of Rome, McMillan, or Polk, and then the running back situation I'm just kind of okay on. Now, the Huskies' rush defense has been kind of interesting because they've really held some teams in check. The Arizona game was really quite weird for me. I thought that they would obviously stuff them in a locker, but it was good to get a little bit of a semi-close loss, kind of give them a reality check. They did really good defending the run in that one, but Noah, however to say that, scored 3 touchdowns and looked really good. So the passing game is what's really going to probably hurt the Huskies here. Rushing wise, I'm not that afraid, which means Bucky Irving, maybe not the guy, although he does catch a lot of passes, but I'm not sure that he's really the guy that we want to go to if we're going on the Oregon side, and we definitely are. You even go back and look at the Boise State game in which they held them to 20 points. Everybody's favorite player now, Ashton Genty, who did score a touchdown in that game, was held to 44 yards. Granted, it was only on 10 carries, but shows you all throughout this season, the Huskies' rush defense has been pretty solid. So Irving at 7.5, like I'm fine if people are like hell bent on going there because of his volume and the work he gets in the receiving game. But 7.5 is just a really big price point to pay, and he does have 30+ upside. But you look at the games here: Colorado 13, Stanford 20. 21 even against Texas Tech in a competitive game. Like it's a fine score, but 7.5, we're really being asked to put a lot into it. Bo Nix at 10K. It's gonna be tough if you want to play both. Like last week, I was really on the cusp of saying like, hey, screw everything, play Drake May, play Jaden Daniels, find a way to get both in. And if you did, you made some sacrifices, but geez, both of them scored, 1 million points. Nix is probably coasting into 30 fantasy points here pretty easily. The one thing he has over Penix is the fact that he's a mobile quarterback. However, he hasn't been getting it going on that side of the ball, or that aspect of the game, I should say, just yet. He has 15 passing touchdowns, 1 interception, 1,500 passing yards, which is great. On the rushing side, just the 1 touchdown and less than 90 yards, which at this point last season, he was already over a few hundred. So that element to his game missing, that's something that kind of downgrades him slightly, but his passing volume is going to be heavy, and he has probably or arguably better weapons than he has had at any point in his career this season. Between, the Jesus, hella high-priced 8-1 of Troy Franklin, one of my still favorite receivers on the team, Tez Johnson, who's recently priced at 5.9, Gary Bryant at 5K, and then down there to Treshawn Holden, who sits at 4.6. and is somebody who has been somewhat relevant the past couple of weeks, especially in PPR scoring there on DK. So we have some definite options that we can go to on both sides. But for me, it's the passing game on each, which means if you want to find some contrarian ways, using running backs on either side is definitely going to be a situation where I think both could be on the lower side of rostership. Now, looking at it, 42 targets for Troy Franklin, leads the team by a mile, 32 catches, 535 yards, 7 touchdowns. Then it drops to Tez Johnson with 22 targets. However, he's been super efficient with those. 15 catches, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. Gary Bryant, 18 on 21 targets, 227 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then Treshaun Holden, who 17 catches on 20 targets, 185 yards, 3 touchdowns. It's like, okay, WR4, that's fine. But you got to look at his recent games where he caught all 6 of his targets against Stanford, did have a touchdown, 33 yards, which shows you a lot of that was short yardage stuff. Against Colorado, 4 of his 6 targets, 52 yards. All 4 of his targets against Hawaii, 63 yards, 2 touchdowns. So he's not going to be racking up the yardage, but he is cheap. He is a way to, and we were looking for that Colorado game a couple weeks back with USC. How can we get a cheap exposure to a receiver here? There were a couple of cheapies on Colorado. It ended up being the freshman that no one was on, but there was a cheapie there that did pan out. And I do think Treshaun Holden has shown he has the talent, the ability to definitely pay off a price like 4.6, even if it's going to be in a less glamorous way because he's going to catch, 5-6 passes for 25 yards. However, he might score 2 or 3 times, which really will break the slate wide open. However, the Franklin kid is where everybody's going to want to roster. I'm super jacked that he's priced so high because that makes it really difficult to pay. And it's going to keep his rostership down probably below 20% unless people are going to make some serious sacrifices. Now, when I look around the industry, and I try not to do this before the show in the articles, I don't want to be swayed. I am seeing in 2 places where they're hyping up Bucky Irving to a great extent, which definitely doesn't puzzle me necessarily, but I'm on the opposite end of that. And you might feel differently. We'll get your take here in a minute. But for me, I would much rather go like Knicks, Gary Bryant, one of those guys, one of those cheap receivers, and hope for the best there and just that it's going to shoot out. And Irving might catch 2 or 3 touchdown passes himself, which makes him relevant. It's just the fact that he doesn't have this huge workload, and you're asking me to pay almost Blake Corum level prices on a slate where I don't have a lot of value. Every penny's going to be counting. I need to save every dollar I can. I don't know that I can pay the 7.5 for Bucky Irving. So where are you at with him and everybody else in this game, I guess?
Why'd they have to do Devontae Walker at 3K last week? We needed him this week so we could stack every piece of this Oregon-Washington game. So if you plug in Bo and Penix and Franklin and Rome, you are left with $34.50 per slot thereafter. So I don't think we can quite do that. Or we're going to have to find a lot of value in order to get there. So couple notes because you had pretty thorough there, but didn't get a Jack Westover shout, didn't get a Devin Culp shout. I'm a little bit disappointed that you're not getting your Washington tight ends, but they've both shown at times a nose for the red zone, and maybe this is the kind of game that they try to get the tight ends involved a little bit more. And certainly Penix had some familiarity with Westover and the Michigan State game in 437-3. Heck, certainly shown capable of it, right? So I think if choosing between the two, even though Culp is cheaper, I probably would lean Westover just because I think there's a little bit more upside there. Penix Bernard Westover stack seems like a super contrarian thing to do, but you could grab 3 touchdowns out of those 2 guys, and you're doing it for quite a bit cheaper than you would be if you're going Rome or either of the Jalen's. So that's one way to play it. Probably not a lot of people doing it that way. If you want to throw Terrence Ferguson on the other side of that, get a 3.9. So if you're playing both quarterbacks, but you want to get cheap exposure to the receivers, that's not the worst way to go. Like, all of those guys are going to be used in the red zone. All of those guys have touchdown upside, potentially multiple touchdown upside, and if they get there, that's a lot more valuable than if Rome or the Jalen's or Troy Franklin gets there just because of the pricing. So I think that, my initial take, if I'm trying to use both quarterbacks, is I have to pair them with cheap receivers. There's no other way to do it, really. I am probably, if choosing between the two, going to be a little bit more likely to lean on Bo, just because I think that the legs do get involved in this one. He hasn't really needed to do that. I mean, Oregon has had pretty comfortable wins in every game besides Texas Tech. And Texas Tech is, of course, the only game that he actually ran the ball at all. So I think with this one being an uber competitive game, probably the most competitive game they'll have outside of the USC game, I think that Bo actually does probably pull the ball down and run a good amount in this one. And so that would be a tiebreaker for me, not to take anything away from Penix. I think Penix probably has the better game through the air, but it's more valuable for Bo to do it on the ground, right? And so if only using one, I'm probably using Bo. And I think if you are using Bo and just Bo, you got to pair him up with Franklin, because Troy Franklin's unstoppable. The only thing that has stopped Troy Franklin is the fact that they've blown everybody out, and even then he's been above 30 points 3 times. So it's 8-1 is a big ask for anybody, but I think if there's a guy to do it with, the receiver with the most upside in the most competitive, high scoring total, I think you gotta go all in. So I would love to see Dylan Johnson get involved in this one too, man. It seems like, everyone's going to be so hyped up trying to stop Penix. And we saw that a little bit in the Arizona game. I feel like Arizona did the same thing to Caleb Williams. They made those offenses do things that they were kind of uncomfortable doing. And, could see a similar game plan coming out of Oregon, and throwing a bunch of guys back there in the secondary and making them keep the ball in front of them. And I could see Dylan Johnson being a beneficiary of that, both in the receiving work and also when they hand the ball off to him and run it. So I doubt Dylan Johnson's going to garner a ton of ownership, considering how people tend to overreact to the defensive rating of the opponent. You see that, Oregon is 6th against the run. Well, that doesn't mean that Oregon's run defense is good. That means that Oregon's been up by so many points all season that nobody's really bothered to run the ball because they've been down by 30 points pretty quickly. So I think that if there's a most overlooked guy in this game, it's probably going to be Dylan Johnson, and I'm going to have a healthy amount of him because of that.
Yeah, I wish the Huskies did use their tight ends, man. They don't play very many quality, their snaps, they're out there blocking. Colt barely plays. He was the tight end of the future 2 years ago, but Westover had the nice game. He did see a spike in snaps last game as well, but they just don't get targeted. However, if you're right and they keep everything in front of them, then it would make sense for the tight ends to get a little bit more work, because generally Penix is just throwing it down the field and letting his fast-ass receivers get it. But yeah, maybe they keep it in front of them this time and we see a spike in their targets. But as a tight end connoisseur, it does suck to have a team that really doesn't look at their tight ends really at all. But Westover did show that, hey, he can catch 4 passes in a game and 3 of them be touchdowns at least once this season, maybe again. I like the Bo Nix only call there. I don't know. I got to get some more clarity from others and see what's going to happen here, because I know people aren't going to be able to play both. But man, it's crazy to see Franklin be playable at this price, because last year Oregon receivers were so spread out and just not playable. I remember hitting unders on Franklin 3 different times last year and cashing all of them. Crazy how that happens. But yeah, I think for me, I'm going with the Holden Bryant cheapie if I can save some money there, and then depending on that McMillan news, a guy such as Bernard. But right now I'm looking at Polk as my number one option, just because he is the cheapest of the 3 primary options there. And that's just like the Colorado USC game. Everyone was expensive, and it was like, hey, man, we got to try to fade this because they're going to blow them out and blah, blah, blah. And then it turned into being like a shootout at the end. And that's what happened with the damn last USC game, too, because they can't guard anyone or defend anybody, I should say. All right, moving on here, we've got Illinois versus Maryland. 51.5 total, 14-point favorites are Maryland. Terps haven't shown me that they're 14 points better than very many teams this year, at least in their own conference. So I'm kind of interested in maybe betting the Illinois side here, but they're awful. So maybe I should not bet this game at all. What do you got on this one?
I'm not sure if there is anybody that I'm less confident in, but still consistently use than Luke Altmaier. Like I can't get away from him. He almost never pans out. But every now and then he like just runs for 100 yards and a touchdown out of nowhere, and you're like, well, shoot, I should have used Luke Altmaier. He was 6K. I feel the same way about him this week, man. Like at 6'2" against Maryland. Maryland's not good, and they're definitely not 2 touchdowns better than Illinois. But I also feel like he could just get sacked 17 times and fumble the ball 3 times and get a concussion. And then game over for Luke Altmaier, right? So, I would like to be interested. I would like to find a way to be interested. I've got to find a 6K quarterback somewhere, but I would probably feel a little bit better about using the Mendoza kid from Cal than I would Luke Altmaier. I just like I wouldn't be, even if I did it, I wouldn't be confident in it. So that being said, I am even less confident in whatever is going to happen in the Illinois running game. Illinois running game pretty much is Luke Altmaier. That's a place I'll probably stay away from and don't need to get into a ton. Isaiah Williams, though, I think is at a fair, if not slightly underpriced 5.5. He gets all the volume. If Luke Altmaier decides to throw it, it is going to be to Juice, and he's the guy, man. Like they need a win right now. It's been kind of a rough, disappointing year for Illinois so far, especially having tried to build on what they did last year, getting shut down, only scoring 7 points against Nebraska. That's got to leave a kind of a weird taste in your mouth, and when that happens, you want to get the ball to your playmakers, and so it's kind of going to be Juice or bust for me. I mean, if you want to make a case for a Pat Bryant, who also saw some decent efficiency and scored the only touchdown of the game, you get a marginal discount, but I think your volume play is Juice, and that's probably it. I don't want to try to play in like the Tip Raymond 3K range. It gets gross down there. We don't need to do all that. On the Maryland side, Maryland has probably 6 different receivers that could each catch a touchdown. Obviously starts kind of at the top with Jayshon Jones, and he's been seeing a good amount of volume. I think between him and Juice, I'm probably still going to use Juice because there's just such a more consolidated usage in the Illinois offense than there is in Maryland. But I do think Jayshon Jones has a higher ceiling just because of how susceptible Illinois can be at times to the deep ball. And when Baby Tua's got it going, he really has it going. Like there's no real in between game for him. It's the terrible game against Ohio State, or it's the amazing ceiling game against Indiana, and not a whole lot of in between for him. So I do think, especially given what the spread is, I do think that we are more likely to see the ceiling game from him. However, at 8.2, I don't know that I want to necessarily use him, but it makes me more interested in deploying receivers from his stock. So, if you want to get to a Jayshon Jones or Dykes or Caden Prather, whoever you want to get to, I think is a fine call on the Maryland side. I'm not married to any of them. I cannot figure out Roman Hemby. When I play Roman Hemby gets like 6 yards and fumbles twice. When I don't play Roman Hemby, he goes for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. I've played Roman Hemby a lot, and he hasn't done very well in any of those. And so maybe there's some correlation there that I haven't figured out yet. Maybe there's some secret science. I know Antwain Littleton isn't very good, and so they should give Roman Hemby 20 touches a game, and yet they don't. And I don't really see why. I think this would be a really good opportunity for a good Roman Hemby game. I think 6.5 is a fair price for the uncertainty that he presents, and also the upside that he presents. And so flip a coin, and whichever side you're hoping for, go with that, because he's kind of just right there with Baby 2. He's going to have an amazing game, or he's going to completely kill your lineup, and generally you'll know in the first quarter which way it's gone for Roman Hemby. So what are your thoughts? Do you think we get a good, productive Maryland offense, or do you think that nobody knows what they're doing and they just completely screw it up?
I'll lean towards the play calling being awful as usual, which one of our subs, Jamie, kind of pointed that out early on Maryland. But I do think Hemby, if he gets anywhere close to like 15 touches, could pay out. But 6.5 is such a horrific price to even pay. And I know he was over 8K at points this season, and like hasn't really warranted that price tag. I know he had a big game against Charlotte a while back, but he's gonna put up points here. But I don't know if it'll be enough to pay off the 6.5. And I think that the Maryland coordinator is so silly that they'll probably have success running the football because everybody does against Illinois, and then they'll suddenly start like passing and phase Hemby out. So be prepared for that, and be prepared for like a random like Kobe McDonald touchdown to steal. Like they'll get in the red zone and McDonald will be the one to punch it in. So for me, I'm off Hemby, but I get the play because Illinois is horrible. I actually find myself liking Caden Prather a lot more than I should. He's the type of receiver I'll play in Maine, and he'll get like 2 catches for 30 yards, and I'll be like, why did I play that guy? So I'm trying not to use him, but he is standing out to me as somebody who is a very viable option out of this kind of deep Maryland receiver room, even if it's not spectacular at all. And yeah, Juice Williams at 5.5. Expect heavy ownership on him because he's just for me. You say he's reasonably priced. I agree, but he probably should be over 6K at this point. And I can just not find myself getting away from him. And then we do see the running backs for Illinois. McCray's hurt. Love's now doubtful. We'll probably see Caden Fagan at 4.5 end up in a lot of lineups just because people are desperate for value, but it's not as if he's very good. So that's bad. That could potentially be bad chalk. I just want to highlight the Caden Fagan potential to be really bad chalk. But he could also hurt us if we don't play him and he scores twice, which would be very tilting. But overall, this game, yeah, it looks awful. But there's several cheap playable options, and we're not really looking at so much value just yet. And we only have 3 games left, so hopefully there's some other options so we don't have to play 2 or 3 guys from Illinois, Maryland, because that doesn't sound very fun to me. All right, Texas A&M versus Tennessee. 3-point favorites are the Vols. 55 total is what I got from DK here. I think that one could definitely go over, and we do start to find some value here on the Texas A&M side that's definitely feasible. It's time people start looking at Texas A&M. I mentioned Carson Beck. Like, when's the industry going to kind of notice this guy's playing really well? Kind of the same thing with Texas A&M. They had that game a couple weeks back against Miami, turned into a shootout, and they've been overall producing pretty well as a team. Now, I know Max Johnson's not going to get any love from you. He's only 6'5". I do like Max, but I think where we can get some value here is going back to Aniyah Smith, who I really tried to push early in the season, and it was all about Evan Stewart catching all these touchdowns. The tight end kind of broke out the first 2 weeks, but now as we're getting into the nitty-gritty in the middle point of the season, Aniyah Smith is starting to become a really viable main team option, and he's over 2K cheaper than Evan Stewart, yet probably will produce just as well this week. You see he's had at least 4 receptions in his last 4 games, for an 88 last week for 12 points at 4.9. Anything over double digits for me on this slate, needing some value. I would have loved to have seen him be even a little bit cheaper. But this should be a very paced up game for them. Tennessee pushing the pace, I think Smith could absolutely see some heavy volume here, somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 targets, and possibly even a carry or two if they want to get the rock in his hand. So that's value play number one. And then in the running back situation to start the season, Reuben Owens was there, Amari Daniels, Lev Moss, like all these guys cannibalizing each other, and not a lot of effectiveness from any of them. But recently, Lev Moss has started to separate himself a little bit. He had a game of 107 yards against Arkansas. He had a game of 97 yards against Auburn. Last week against Bama, he didn't really get it done on the ground, 49 yards, but he did score a touchdown, and he did lead the backfield in snaps and touches. So at 5.3K, he's 300 cheaper than, 300 more expensive than Daniels. He's almost 1K more expensive than Owens, but at this point, you look at the snaps from last game, and you have the following. Lev Moss, 76% of the snaps, Amari Daniels, 14%, and Reuben Owens, 12%. So non-existent were those two, being completely phased out. And when you look back, Owens has been trending down. After the first week, he had 60% of those snaps, and he's been trending down by 10% or 10 to 15% each week subsequently. Amari Daniels has been right around 35 to 40, and that was a big nosedive for him to 14. So it looks to me like Lev Moss is definitely the guy and somebody that we can consider for our main lineup against this Vols team, because he does pass catch a little bit, and he's just going to get that double-digit carries, 15 to 20. 5.3. It's not the cheapest price in the world, but we're kind of hard up for cheapies here, and that is somebody that I'm definitely looking at along with Anaya Smith. Either one of those guys I think I'd be happy with running in my lineup. Not necessarily both, but I'm certainly okay with one of them, and will definitely do so. I do like Max Johnson in this game for like a GPP like dart, if you will. 6.5 is not cheap enough there. I would have loved to have seen him at like 5.5 instead, so I won't push the button there. And then on the Tennessee side, Milton at 8.8. I don't like the idea of paying such a high price for him. He's not, I've already said it, so I don't need to beat the guy in the ground, but he's obviously not Hendon Hooker. He had a nice game against the likes of UTSA and Virginia. Like, good for him, I suppose. But South Carolina, they blew the doors off them. He had passing volume, even 32 attempts, but 12 fantasy points, not really great. Against UTSA, he also showed he had a knack for maybe running the football a little bit, as he had 90 rushing yards, but that's not something he's been consistently able to do either. In conference games, he's been pretty horrific to this point. Obviously, still pretty early in the conference season, though. I'm not paying 8.8 for him, even though I think this game will be nice, and we have seen quarterbacks get it done against Texas A&M, so it wouldn't shock me if he put up a decent score, but there's no way in hell we have 8.8 for Milton when we have all these high-priced guys in that Oregon-Washington game that we're going to have to play. We've got some on the Kansas side we're going to talk about, and there's just not enough salary to make that work. The running backs for Tennessee, they're in a timeshare. Obviously, Jabari Small, at this point, he's been on the team for a really long time. And then, of course, Jalen Wright, who's kind of really, I guess, made himself the better of the two, but it's not as if he's getting, more snaps, more carries consistently. It's still a pretty even snap count, but Wright has been able to do more and been more efficient with his touches. He has 3 games over 100 yards. 6'4", he's okay. I'm more so looking at the wide receivers for Tennessee and the Lev Moss running back for Texas A&M. Now, I was about to say good news. It's never good news when there's injuries that happen, but Brew McCoy suffered like one of the most heinous injuries I've seen in quite a while. I think like the only thing I've seen more heinous the past decade was Kevin Ware. And if you watch college basketball, he was the kid on Louisville who had like the leg go backwards. Like, that was a gnarly injury. So unfortunately, Brew McCoy's season is done. So it's not good news, but does make the targets a little more concentrated, as Ramel Keaton, who is my guy, and Squirrel White, who is the industry's guy, will be much more targeted consistently. It won't be spread out as much. Dante Thornton, who is a transfer by way of Oregon, did not play last week, but it sounds like he's going to be available for this one here against Texas A&M. He's only 4.3. He's an interesting GPP value. I don't know that I would go right to him coming back after missing a couple of weeks, but theoretically, he should get more time now and more snaps without Brew McCoy. But really, Keaton and White's target share should go way, way high. Now, Keaton hasn't been great the last couple of weeks. 2 catches for 25 yards, 1 catch for 48, 3 for 39. just hasn't been connecting with Milton the way that he did with our guy Hendon Hooker. Squirrel White has done really well with Milton. 9 catches for 104 yards last week. Had a 70-yard game against Florida. Overall, he's been just okay, but those are the 2 games that really are going to cause him to have a lot more ownership than Keaton. So leverage-wise, and this has been the story forever, Keaton is going to be the lower owned of the 2. He's 200 more. That's negligible. I still will look to Keaton. When I look at, let me pull up the snaps here. I had it pulled up a second ago. Keaton played 98% of the snaps, so on the field forever. Squirrel Light, 93%. The tight ends, they went with a dual tight end a couple times. Jacob Warren, 70%. McAllen Castles, 38%. And then we saw Caleb Webb play 41% once Brew McCoy went down as the WR3. But clearly, Keaton and White aren't going to leave the field. So really, if it's going to be a situation where White's going to be 40% owned, like it looks like he might be, and Keaton's going to be like 10%, I'll just take the leverage. Yes, Keaton hasn't been as good recently, but the numbers haven't been that dynamic or that much more for White consistently to warrant that kind of ownership difference at that price point. So I like both. I know the industry and everybody will be on Squirrel White. I will, again, be on Ramil Keaton, and that is a spot that I'm okay being different. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, man. I would love for it to be Ramel Keaton week. I've been kind of waiting for that like huge, crazy, explosive Ramel Keaton game. I like the Smith call a lot. I like the Moss call a lot. I do think that one of those pieces, if not both, could get the value that we've been looking for. Personally, probably looking to lean Moss a little bit. You know, anytime you get a running back with that kind of volume at, you know, low fives, that's extremely intriguing. And I also think they probably have a little bit more success in the run game. So maybe like a Moss and Keaton or Moss and White pairing from this one is probably the way I would play it.
Definitely. All right, moving right along. We got the last 2 games here. Kansas versus Oklahoma State, 56 total. This is one I think could have the potential to go over. Kansas 3-point favorites. Now we have the weekly, you know, injuries to Jalen Daniels, the whole like doubtful, then he's available, but we know Bean's going to start. So at least we're ahead of the game heading into this weekend for sure. So start us off with this one.
So who's had the more disappointing season between Cam Rising and Jalen Daniels? Like, I guess Cam Rising because he hasn't actually been on the field.
Yeah.
But, like, the expectations for Jalen Daniels were just so high. And, like, he was kind of on my list of guys that I thought was going to have, you know, a season that could catapult him into, like, the next tier of a career beyond college football, and just so disappointing. Equally disappointing is Jason Bean. Like, the dude just is not a quarterback that throws the ball, and like he does have some efficiency running the ball from time to time, but like that's just it's not his game. He's just gonna kind of hand the ball off mainly. So definitely not using Jason Bean at 7K. I have so much interest in Devin Neal. I just like I don't want to lock anyone on this slate. It seems like a pretty wide open slate, especially with, you know, trying to get to so much in the Oregon-Washington game. But, man, I just like Devin Neal in a competitive game. He might actually get to, you know, 20 carries in this one. I hope. I just want to, like, if you kept track of like what happened in the UCF game last week after Devin Neal went out, it was like, well, now they gave it to Highshaw, and then Highshaw went for like 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then they gave it to McDuffie, and McDuffie went for like 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. It was like, man, this Kansas running game just cannot be stopped. And part of that is UCF is just terrible, but part of that is like, man, Kansas can really run the ball. And they are going to want to, because they want it out of Jason Bean's hands. And that means Devin Neal in a lot of volume. This will stay a more competitive game. Oklahoma State has been pretty bad against the run. Not usually what we expect out of them. Usually, you know, they're kind of nails up front and can contain the run. And, maybe if you get into a shootout with them and you can open things up a bit, but they've been pretty susceptible over the middle against, underneath receivers and tight ends, and also against the run. It's just very uncharacteristic from Oklahoma State. But man, oh man, I think Devin Neal is going to have a game here. He's probably the guy I'm most confident in. He's whatever the inverse of my level of confidence in like a Devin Maccabee would be. Devin Neal's the opposite of that. Like I'm so feeling good about Devin Neal on this one. That's not to say that Haisha can't also have a good game too. I don't think he's going to get 20 touches the way that he did against UCF. But he has shown the ability to be ultra efficient in kind of a backup role. We haven't seen him get over 15 fantasy points, excluding last game when he got all that volume. So I don't know that I'm necessarily getting to high shot at 5'8". I think I would much rather try to find a way to get to Neal. And then obviously McDuffie, we're not going to see anywhere near the volume from him. I don't think he gets more than like 2 or 3 carries in this one. Much more competitive game brewing. As far as the receivers go, it's like the worst possible version of receiver roulette. Like none of them are going to get a lot of volume, and they have a terrible quarterback throwing to them. Somehow I guarantee one of them will get a touchdown. It's probably Grimm or Arnold that gets the touchdown, but who knows with this group. And they're not as cheap as they should be for who they have throwing to them. So I don't want to get to anybody in the Kansas receiver room, even though I think one of them will probably score once. And that doesn't do it for me at the mid 4 to 5K price tag. You need at least the upside of getting to 100 yards and a touchdown. I don't think any of them have a reasonable expectation of doing that. I think, obviously anybody has a chance to break one on any given day, but with Jason Bean throwing the ball, like it's not just that he throws incompletions, it's that he throws the ball to a point where receivers can't really catch the ball in stride, and they got to slow down to catch the ball, and it makes for not a whole lot of yak opportunity. And so it's hard to get there. On the Oklahoma State side, because Kansas, as good as Devin Neal is and as good as they are at running the ball, they've just been very susceptible to competent offenses, derailing them. I think I get to say it. Do we get to use Alan Bowman this week? For the 7th year, or however many years in a row, is Alan Bowman a viable option? If he weren't 7K, I would be a little bit more inclined to go that way, just because Kansas is going to be, there's going to be fantasy points in Kansas games. And so if he were like 5'5" or 5'9" or somewhere in there, I'd probably be a lot more likely to do it. 7K is a lot to ask for Alan Bowman. I'm very interested in Ollie Gordon. Ton of volume from him last couple games that he's played. Good amount of work in the passing game too. 11 catches on the year, so it's not like he's getting 5 catches a game or anything, but he's definitely a guy that they look to in that regard as well, and only 6'2". Kind of reminiscent of the Memphis and Boise game, where it was like, oh, can I play both running backs in the same game? Turns out, yeah, you can. It does pretty well if they're both high volume backs that also get usage in the passing game. So pairing up Neal and Ollie Gordon, probably not a quote unquote, industry type of move, but definitely one that could work in our favor. And then, who is Alan Bowman throwing to? Could be Brandon Presley, could be Jaden Bray, could be Ollie Gordon. It gets a little bit spread out. Not sure I have a lot of faith in like another ceiling game from Rashad Owens in particular. Probably going to limit my exposure to just the running backs from this one. unless, there's a receiver room limitation. We find out at the last minute or in time enough to swap that we get, some receivers are out in this game, and it narrows the receiver room down a little bit. I think both of the quarterbacks are equally bad and, spread the ball around enough that it's hard to lock on to any one receiver, and I'd rather just take the low to mid 6K running backs on either side of this one.
Yeah, Neal's our guy. Touchdown machine, bounced back in a big way last week. Playing him makes too much sense. Ollie Gordon, I would have liked to have seen him a little cheaper, but yeah, he's playing almost 90% of the snaps, has completely relegated the other backs in that room to strictly mop-up duty or water break duty. Now, I'm good with a Kansas receiver fade too. But on the Oklahoma State receivers, at least Deshaun's, and again, not good news, but Deshaun Stribling gone for the season. So that did make on that Oklahoma State slate, I think it was on the secondary one, some of the guys interesting like Jaden Bray, and we were getting people asking about, Brendan Presley. Now, Rashad Owens, I think, will draw ownership because, again, we're kind of desperate for some value. He's 3.5. Yes, it is a bit of a chase there because he has done nothing else for a year and a half. But there was a time 2 years ago, almost identical situation where Oklahoma State had some injuries in the receiver room, and Owens had like a 2 or 3 week period where he became super viable as a value receiver. Ended up with like 300 yards, 17 catches in 2021, did nothing last year, and till last week has done nothing this year. So it's very hard to trust a player like that, certainly. But he is going to get the additional snaps and probably some extra targets as well. So not a value where I'm going to sit here and be like, we got to lock him in. But if we're really struggling to find, other cheapies, he's definitely somebody that we have to at least consider. Another guy you can maybe look at is Blaine Green, but he's even worse. So it is a very unappetizing, unappealing receiver room. You could go up to Jaden Bray at 4.9 if you can find that. He's at least been steady as a PPR option, but I don't know that we're going to have that 4.9 price to pay for him. That feels like a little bit of a premium there. But I'm with you. I play 2 running backs in the same game all the time on opposite teams, and it works a ton at the collegiate level. All right, last game on the slate here, Iowa versus Wisconsin. The designation of the lowest total on the slate, 34.5. The Badgers are 10-point favorites. What a game to end with. Iowa, I mean, geez, it's tough that they lose, at least a semi-decent quarterback to go to Deacon Hill. Now the running backs, and I'm not using him, so we'll just move right along. The running back situation, they're cheap. LaShawn Williams is 4.9. Caleb Johnson is 5.5. Now I really wanted Caleb Johnson to be a thing this year. I felt like, hey, this kid's just going to get all this work. He's going to definitely be great, and it just hasn't panned out for him. However, and he missed some time with injuries and stuff, but against Purdue, man, he came back to life, a la The Undertaker, get the meme there where it's like he comes out of the casket, 17 carries, 134 yards, and a touchdown. He didn't fumble. He managed to hang on to the ball. A really nice game. Obviously, on the road against Wisconsin is a lot different than playing Purdue, especially at home, but that was a bit of a eye-opener for me that, yes, this kid can actually play, and Iowa is going to have to run the football a lot. Now, LaShawn Williams also had a pretty decent game, 75 yards on 13 carries. He's been hit or miss. He had that 150-yard game a few weeks back. They are splitting carries as well, so that's never fun. But I mean, Iowa's going to run the football. They're going to try to at least. So those 2 guys are at least somewhat interesting, maybe on the afternoon slate as options, but don't want to write them off completely. You do have cheapies, Eric All sitting there at 4.3. You'd think with the, Deacon Hill there, maybe he's going to take a step back, but that didn't happen. They're still peppering All with targets, 5 catches, 97 yards, and a touchdown. Back-to-back weeks where he scored a touchdown. So at 4.3, he does represent a viable value option that you can definitely use. Again, not a priority like line in the sand value that I'm going to play, but say you're around 4.4, 4.5, you're like, where can I go with the receiver here? I don't want to play Owens and leave, Salader on the table. Eric All is absolutely somebody who can go out and just get you 10 points, 50, and maybe he scores, maybe he doesn't, but he doesn't hurt your lineup too bad at that 4.3 price tag. As far as the rest of the receivers on Iowa, it's pretty much a no. On the Wisconsin side, I made Tanner Mordecai, fantastic player at SMU. Hasn't been able to recapture that magic for Wisconsin. The Purdue game he did well in, but that was because he rushed for a pair of touchdowns, which he's actually done in back-to-back weeks heading into the last game. And then he went back to not scoring, but he's still rushing at a pretty high level, had 50 rushing yards, but only 145 passing. So the 7.5 price tag is down from where it was. He's going to start getting into playable pricing here pretty soon if he keeps having these underwhelming passing games. Now, they said Wisconsin was going to throw the football a lot more. That hasn't quite happened. And we know Tanner Mordecai is capable, but he probably isn't going to break out as a passer against this Iowa team, even at home. So tough to really recommend him there. Another expensive option is Braylon Allen. Now, Braylon Allen is back to super bell cow work, getting all the touches in the world, gonna, just get run into the ground. He had another 100-yard game last week, 20, I believe, with targets, 25 touches. Somebody who is certainly in play at 8-3. Now, it's a little bit tougher of a matchup against Iowa historically, but I think with his volume, he still will probably coast into 20, 22 fantasy points. But that opportunity cost makes it hard because he's pretty much in the Blake Corum aspect there, is that Corum's in a much bigger blowout. They're probably going to get a similar score, even though Corum's going to play less than Allen, just because matchup's a little bit better than Corum, a lot of bit better for Corum and not as good for Allen. And sometimes the Badgers do really strange things on offense, no matter who is the coordinator, who is the quarterback. So I like Allen if you can get there, but definitely not somebody that I am going to prioritize. And with the way the pricing is on the slate, you're not just going to fall into 8-3. On the receiving side, because of the fact that Mordecai hasn't been able to get going and they're not having much success, it hasn't really been that exciting to use any of them. Chimere Dike, coming into the season, the bona fide, WR1 stud, had a couple good games early, has fallen off since. Snaps going down, targets going down, not great. Will Pauling had 8 catches for 68 yards, 15 fantasy points last week. That's the third time this season he's been in double digits. His stock is trending up. Now, I still like Skylar Bell. He was not great his last game against Purdue, and I think he played like way less snaps than he usually does in the game prior to that. He has been decent, not great, and this career has not turned out the way that I thought it would. But again, a lot of that has to do with the play calling and the fact that Tanner Mordecai just hasn't been effective. So I think that Skylar Bell makes sense as a GPP option. But this passing game, man, it's outside of Pauling right now, who Mordecai seems to have locked on. There's really nobody that you can use. So the decision for the quote-unquote hammer game is, do you want to pay up for Braylon Allen, which it's going to be hard to do, or do you just want to fade it and let somebody else try to deal with it? Probably the right option, unless you end up with Eric All, who I'm perfectly fine running in my main team, as long as you have, the expectation in mind that, hey, he's probably going to give me 10 fantasy points, not 20. But we can live with that if we can stuff the rest of our lineup with these Huskies, Kansas guys, Tennessee, Texas A&M, all of those alluring options. All right, that is the slate. We are done with all 12 games. Let's get into cores now. Jake, if you have one ready, locked and loaded, let's hear what it is. I feel like it's going to be pretty nifty, pretty tricky. Let's hear
it. Well, I don't know if it's nifty or not. I'm gonna go Bo Nix, which is obviously going to be pretty chalky. Devin Neal, probably also pretty chalky, and then Jermaine Burton, which is probably not going to be pretty chalky. So two chalk, one a little bit off the board.
Okay, I love it. Yeah, I like that off the board there. For me, same game, but I'm going Penix, and if it goes the other way and Nix is the higher owned, that's perfectly fine for me. I know he doesn't have the rushing upside some of the other guys do, but I love Penix. And for the GPP one-off, if there's a core for a GPP, Jordan Travis this week just seems awesome. Running back, yeah, Neal, he's really good. We've been using him for a long time. I will go with Ollie Gordon because I do think Neal and Gordon are just the first two running backs to kind of just lock in for me. We haven't had very many opportunities to run 4 running backs, and this is one of those slates where I'm kind of indifferent on a lot of the higher priced options. So Ollie Gordon for sure. And then at wide receiver, it's going to be Jalen Polk for me. Obviously, it's more alluring to play, Franklin, Roma, Jalen McMillan if he plays. There's some cheapies, but Polk is just he's in that price point where it's not going to break our bank. He's not super cheap either, but he's in kind of like this weird price where people probably will either pay up or pay down, and he'll get forgotten about and still have the upside for 25 plus fantasy points in this matchup. So Jalen Polk is where it is at. On the hop over to FanDuel real quick. Jaden Daniels is now 13K on FanDuel going up against an Auburn team that only has like a bit of a pulse, not a huge pulse. He's going to put up another huge score. I don't know, man. I don't know how we can even fade him. I know it's a lot of money there, but I just have to continue to play Jaden Daniels on whether it's FanDuel, whether it's DraftKings, whether it's Draft Street, they bring it back from the dead, whatever site you can think of. I just continue to play Jaden Daniels. I don't know how I can't. I love Imani Bailey this week going up against BYU. That's on FanDuel there. He's 9-1. He is my core running back for the FanDuel slate. And then when it comes to FanDuel, you got Marvin Harrison 10K. You got Franklin 9-9. This is a really tough spot to go against, but Luther Burden, man, he's just getting all the targets going up against Kentucky on their field, but he's probably going to be targeted like 19 times. So I'm just going to chase that volume with Luther Burden there and give you another expensive option. On the breakdown that comes out tomorrow for the main slate, there will be a lot more FanDuel content for those of you who play it. All right, let's move over to PrizePicks, and then we'll finish up here and get going. Do you have some PrizePicks options that you've pulled so far and are feeling good about?
So I think everybody in the Oregon-Washington game, I think this is going to be the anti-Oregon-Colorado, where it was just like, oh, well, that game had so much buildup and it didn't mean anything. Bo Nix, for some reason, is under 300 passing yards. I'm not sure why that is. So I'm gonna take Bo Nix over 294.5. I'll take that a lot. That'll probably be a base of a lot of different options. And of course you can get Franklin in there at 92.5. You can get Rome at 89.5 and Jalen McMillan at 94.5. All of that is available. I also, and this probably is an even higher priority, Will Pauling, who is the low ADOT king of all of college football, like just never really catches anything more than like 6 or 7 yards. He's at a 2.5 receptions total. Ooh. And he's more of like a Cam Camper 5 to 8 type of receptions guy. So I'm pretty strongly on Will Pauling over 2.5 receptions. And then let's jump into, let's see. No, there was one more that we liked. Throw a couple yours out there. I'll get back.
So yardage wise, there's quite a few on here that are interesting. Like the first one that sticks out, they have Squirrel White at 68.5. He'll probably hit that, but Ramel Keaton 53.5 receiving yards. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just too high on Ramel Keaton and I'm the president of his fan club, but to me it feels like if he's going to break out, no Drew McCoy, like he should hit 60 plus receiving yards fairly easily. So I like that number a lot. It's probably one of my top ones. There's also a later game, which is the Arizona versus, I believe, Wazoo. Not Jalen McMillan, but Tetroya McMillan, who has kind of emerged there next to Jacob Cowing as a really big play threat. Over 73.5 receiving yards, feels like against Washington State team. He should be a lock for 100 plus. So those are two that I'm really hitting. I was hoping for the Penix. They've been giving me the 3.5 passing touchdowns for him, and that's been hitting with regularity, but they didn't give, it didn't happen against Arizona, of course, but they didn't give that one to me, unfortunately. So I have to look elsewhere there. And there was a rushing yards. Let me just double check. I don't want to give the wrong number. Trying to bait us with that Donovan or that Devin Maccabee number, but I know I'm not going to do it. Let's see. Ollie Gordon, no. Anytime touchdown. Oh, it's this one here against. It's might be a little bit off the wall, but I feel really good about the Kieran Jones kid from Virginia Tech. going up against Wake Forest. There's going to be points scored in that one. He's the dual threat king. He's rushing total is 51.5. He's going to rush for 100 yards against Wake Forest. So that one's about 50 yards under. So hit the over 51.5 rushing yards there if you like to win easy sweat-free bets. That is definitely one. Do you have your others pulled up, or should I give a couple more?
Nope. Got Devin Neal. Did we get to Devin Neal? Did you say?
I was leaving that for you.
Okay, yeah. So Devin Neal, 84.5 rushing yards. I think he clears 100 easily, probably closer to 150 in this one. And then Le'Veon Moss, it's 67.5 rushing yards. I think he'll get enough volume, 17 to 20 carries. I think he can get like 85 or so. Is pretty comfortable. So I like the over on that one.
All right, I'm going to give a couple props, but what is happening with TCU? Asked Mr. Moderator. I feel like TCU gets killed by BYU because no Chandler Morris. Yeah, he's going to be out for like 3 or 4 games, it sounds like, which is why I'm on the Monty Bailey train on everything on FanDuel because he's just going to get a ton of work. But yeah, I don't know, man. TCU, they're it's not last year's TCU team. I think people learning that the hard way. All right, moving to the anytime touchdown scores. We gotta get the honorary Devin Neal play, which is probably going to be pretty bad odds. I just wanted to double check because I have it from another site, but I'm on DraftKings right now, and I just want to make sure I give out the right number. It is minus 230 anytime, but you get plus 450 first touchdown score. And I feel like there's an excellent chance that Devin Neal. So if you like kind of gimmicky props to throw a little bit of money on and for a fun sweat, the first touchdown score of Devin Neal plus 450 is actually, as far as like first touchdowns of the game is concerned, is actually probably a really good bet because they're going to feed him the rock early and often, and he's going to be the one to score. Otherwise, that minus 230 number, which is higher than we'd like, we'll throw that in with a couple of other bets. I mentioned earlier the Oregon State versus UCLA. We like the under 54.5, talking in chat there. There's a couple of others that are going to be in my betting prop that are a betting article that comes out. But I do have, I'm going back to Colston Loveland against Indiana. He got that first touchdown under his belt. This is one I've already put money on, but it's plus 130 anytime touchdown for Colston Loveland. He owes me, so he's going to come through in a big way this week, and I feel pretty confident that he's going to score at least one more touchdown for me and make me a little bit of money before it's all said and done. And then we also have an anytime touchdown for Ramel Keaton at plus 130. So throwing out those touchdowns, I don't know, man. Ramel Keaton, he just has done us so good throughout in these situations where he becomes the main leverage. It just seems like a great spot to look at him with the rest of the field just going to Squirrel White, who's good, no doubt. But there's just a lot to like about Keaton here. And then is it tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow, Stanford at Colorado. Colorado can't defend anyone. We know that. Benjamin Urasek, who is this big-bodied, able working the slot tight end, his receiving prop is 38.5. Go ahead and slam the over. It's minus 115. I couldn't imagine him getting less than 75 yards in this game. All right, we are all wrapped up. We are finishing basically on time. This is the part we're wrapping up with Jake's player. It's come its own segment now. His player that he gives a stat line for. We'll have to come up with a name for it, but he's been running pretty good with it. Who is that player, and what's the stat line going to be?
So I think we're going to go Devin Neal with the original Ray Davis special, which was 150-3. So we're gonna go 150-3 for Devin Neal.
Love it. All right, Devin Neal, he's going to go off for sure. All right, appreciate it. Everyone will be back Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock with Q&A questions, and then once again next week, same time, same place. Thanks everybody who continues to support the show. We will see you guys next week. Best of luck.